Tēnā koutou katoa, o tira kia koutou ngā mana whenua tēnā ki koe mihi ana, tēnō mihi ana kia koe matua nau hoakina mai i tēnei wahanga, kia kōrero hia e nei kōrero I pāna ki te Kaitiakitanga. Apologies if you cannot see me, there's no stool over here, and I am a bit short, but I'll just look at my forehead. But my name is Erana Walker and I'm a PhD student at Te Whare Wānanga Waikato, and I am originally from Whangarei, no reira hiuri tēnei no reipai, I mihi atu ana kia koutou. I'm a descendant of reipai, and reipai actually originates from down here in the Waikato, so it's a very special project, this project to me. And I'm here today to share some of the initial findings that we have gathered through a survey we sent out last year that looks at Kaitiakitanga in the urban space. But before I move into talking about the survey that we sent out, I just want to quickly discuss why this project is important to me and why Kaitiakitanga is important. When I was a student in Whangarei, I attended a full immersion kura, so kura kaupapa Māori, and it was through our river restoration project that I was actually introduced to this idea of restoration. In my whānau, we actually went off Kaitiakitanga, so our form of connection, and through this project we met quite a few different organisations who contributed to helping us connect with our local awa, and also being some of the manpower in planting more trees and monitoring the water. So coming through to Waikato, I wanted to chase that idea of what Kaitiakitanga actually looks like in its different forms. So I did my degrees at Waikato, my masters, and now on to a PhD. I'll move on with the presentation. The first thing I wanted to do is I always do this. I had a student here who was in one of my classes last year, and we focused on Kaitiakitanga, and I'd like to introduce this quote from the Resource Management Act because it actually only gives you a glimpse into what Kaitiakitanga is. And there's a lot of discussions about Kaitiakitanga being guardianship and stewardship, and it's not to say that it's not that, but it's a bit more than focusing on guardianship and stewardship. So I always bring this up. Take a quick snapshot of that, because the next slides are actually going to contribute a bit more to that, so that you actually leave today understanding a bit more about why it's more than just guardianship and stewardship of natural resources and physical resources. So I bought this quote from Margaret Mitu, she's from up north as well, and she talks about our role as kaitiaki. So our role as kaitiaki is passed down through generations, and it's not something that's stagnant, it continues to evolve. So as we experience more issues, issues towards our environment, we have to update our methods and our responses to those issues. And I've picked out 5 key aspects to talk about in this section on Kaitiakitanga to expand further on what it actually means to me. So the first aspect is place, so the context. If you want to understand Kaitiakitanga and how it's practiced, you actually need to understand the importance of place. So this picture is Whangarei. This place means a lot to me. And this is the place where I grew up and learnt about Kaitiakitanga. I connect really, really strongly to this area, and it would be the same for a lot of Māori communities and Māori groups. If we do not look at the basis of place and understanding Kaitiakitanga, you miss out on a whole heap of important information, such as narratives, such as relationships between different hapu, and then the next area is kinship, so kinship relationships, how we connect to each other and also to the environment. You'll see in Te Ao Māori or in the Māori world, We have a lot of narratives that actually establish a connection between people and the natural resources of the environment, and these are what drive Kaitiakitanga. These are the relationships that actually inform how we practice it, where we practice it, and why. And then another important aspect is intergenerational knowledge. So that is a key area that is often disregarded in talking about Kaitiakitanga. So it's how that knowledge is passed down and what kind of knowledges we are learning about. I like to think of intergenerational knowledge as a form of literature. You'll find different stories, different narratives, songs, proverbs, etc. that actually hold really key literature for Māori to know what kind of plants were here before the building of cities, what kind of practices were used to keep the engagement with those resources. The next one that I talk about when I talk about Kaitiakitanga is sustainable use of resources, and I'm not talking about use as in consumption, but use as an engagement. So a lot of our cultural practices actually require some form of plant, some form of resource. So if we look at rāranga or weaving, one of the key plants for that is actually flax, harakeke. If we don't have that, we don't actually have our cultural practice. It's the same with carving. Carving, if we don't have certain woods, we can't practice it. So cultural practice and the engagement with resources are really strongly linked. The other area that I always see excluded is the idea of spirituality. So we're talking about different energies. So Māori is a big form of energy that contributes to the understanding of spirituality, but actually this is one of the key drivers for connecting to the natural world as well for Māori communities. So if we disregard this, you kind of disregard how to connect people to the natural world. It provides a meaning for people and drives that practice. And then before we move on to talk about some of the research, I just wanted to make this clear. So when I talk about urban Māori communities, 80% of Māori live in urban spaces today, or over 80%, and that's a high number. So there's not much of our whānau who are living in urban areas. We're moving, have made the move into, rural areas, we've made the move into more urban spaces. In your urban spaces, you actually have a mix of people. So you have mana whenua like Matua, who actually have been here since the beginning of time, and then you have people like me who are mātāwaka, still Māori, but we've moved into someone else's rohe. So there's a need to understand that there are two different groups. If we are to, say for example, run restoration projects, etc., you need to understand that there are two groups and understand who you engage with first and foremost. So that's just a quick overview. So when I talk about Māori communities, just make sure we have those two groups in mind. But the research that I'm looking at is to seek out what Kaitiakitanga looks like in the urban space. So as talked about before, I'm from Whangarei, and in Whangarei I can practice Kaitiakitanga because that's where I'm centred, that's where I've grown up, and that's where my whānau, hapu, iwi are located. But what happens when someone who has practiced Kaitiakitanga for most of their life have moved to a completely different region, who have their own mana whenua groups? How do I contribute, or what does that look like for me? Beyond that, Kaitiakitanga in the urban space is not really discussed in literature or really in general conversation. So there's no one really talking about the subject, no one's really engaging into what Kaitiakitanga looks like in the urban space. And then the key area of my research is looking at the role of urban environments in altering or influencing our cultural practices and our cultural values. So I'm using a kaupapa Māori approach. Basically, it's just a Māori way of approaching research. I'm doing this so that I engage properly with people from different rōpū. or different groups. And I have 3 data collection methods. So I have surveys, focus groups, and interviews. I've done the survey, so I've ticked that off, and I still have 2 more to go. And today I'll be talking about some of the things that we've found out through the survey. Why this research is important: it provides an insight into Māori cultural practices in the urban space. Again, there's not much people talking about the subject. And secondly, it provides opportunities to understand collaboration, where we can collaborate with the different groups in the urban space. And what does urban restoration actually look like by Māori? If they are practicing it, what does it look like? If they're not practicing it, then why aren't they engaging in those restoration practices? And this is my key question. How are Māori in Hamilton practicing Kaitiakitanga? So the survey the data from the survey I'm about to pull up was actually sent out nationally, so we've got a pretty good general idea of what people think Kaitiakitanga is and where they're actually practicing that in the urban space. And these are my 2 interest areas: the practice and the different Māori groups in Hamilton. The initial data, survey data, I'm just going to run through these quickly. We used the Qualtrics survey software. We had 52 questions and it was distributed in late 2018. We tried to have a mix of questions because 52 questions for our Māori communities would be really hōhā for them. So we tried to keep them as interested as possible. And then I have some quickfire data. Quickfire data. We had over 230 participants or responses to our survey. We had a big concentration from the 24 plus age group. Gender, mostly female, who answered the survey, which was interesting. Living arrangements, most of them rented their houses, so we didn't have a high number of participants who own their homes. The length in urban spaces, there were quite a few that had just moved into the urban space or had been there over 11 years. And the things that surrounded our participants were roads, houses and trees. That's all that they really could see. And the natural resources that participants were using vary, but they are using natural resources in the urban space. I pulled these quotes from the survey to kind of give you an idea of what participants are thinking Kaitiakitanga looks like to them. So that first one up the top, it's a philosophy, which was quite interesting. And the second one that I like it because it actually talks about this idea of connection to the natural environment, but also the responsibility that we have as tangata Māori, tangata whenua, to our environment, regardless of whether they were located in the urban space or not. And then the third was this idea that we are extensions of our environment. But then how can we be extensions of our environment if we're surrounded in the urban space? So that was really interesting, comment from our participants. This was a really cool set of data that surfaced. So they were asked where they practice Kaitiakitanga, and over 30% of them said they practice it at home. So that, along with the marae, shows that they're actually going to places that are familiar, that are comfortable, but it also raises questions as to why our people are not actually going out into parks, recreational areas to practice Kaitiakitanga. And the other interesting one was the 5% who said that they didn't have a place at all to practice it. Still looking into the area, but I picked that it's because they don't have the knowledge or the confidence to go out and practice the concept. This question was about how they learnt. Kaitiakitanga. So through this was an interesting area because it shows that Kaitiakitanga, there's no one way to learn it. There's actually different methods that we use to teach or to learn about Kaitiakitanga according to our participants. And some of them even just learnt it through reading some of the books. I'm not sure if this is because some of them were disconnected from home. The data from our surveys have shown that a lot of them actually stayed in their rural areas, in their childhood areas, but the ones who moved showed that they weren't retaining a lot of the intergenerational knowledge. So mobility has an influence on the knowledge retention of our participants. And this question is about the resources, so the different resources that participants are using and what for. You can see that most are using medicinal resources, so plants such as kawakawa, etc., and I'll be pulling up some of those names soon. Water-based resources, so the land foods and water foods, those were high. People are still going out and diving or collecting kai. We didn't get a lot of responses for carving woods, so probably need to look further into that area. And then your arts and crafts, so your rāranga or your weaving resources will still be used. These are a list. This is only a small list. The list is 2 pages, I think, of some of the resources that participants were using. So I think what's interesting about this is that there's actually a mix between Māori traditional medicines and non-Māori traditional medicines. So it's showing that our participants' understanding of natural resources is not they're not only using those traditional medicines, they're actually expanding a bit further, which is another interesting area. And that's the same with their foods as well. So the foods list, resource list shows the same similar trend. And then they were asked about the contributions that they made to restoration. So one of our key areas for the survey was to inquire about the restoration projects that Māori communities are taking part in or contributing toward. And most of them said that they participate in restoration activities that are marae-based or tribally based. If they are not based in those 2 areas, then they're highly likely not to engage in other areas. So we asked them, well, how do you contribute to these restoration events? And most of them said labour. So labour extends from helping to carry things for the whānau or working on the land in different ways, cultural guidance, and also tree planting. So those were the 3 areas that they stated that they were contributing to restoration. So I guess we come to this nearing the end of the presentation is, what does this data tell us? What is the data telling us? The first one is that Kaitiakitanga is being practiced, but what it looks like by those different groups is an area that this research team will need to inquire a bit more about. It's being practiced at home by the participants. So I think for that area is, how do we bring them out of home and actually be part of community projects, and that those community projects help them to actively practice Kaitiakitanga. The participants or the respondents are still using natural resources, although they are located in urban areas. So how can we use, or how can we collaborate with restoration projects to ensure that they have access to those natural resources? And that it's contributing to different versions of restoration. So there was no one way that the participants saw that they practiced or that they understood restoration. It was actually different for all of them. And that Kaitiakitanga is taught in different ways. So if I take you back to that quote from the RMA, they talked about it being only about guardianship and stewardship. Well, the data is telling us that it's actually a bit more, and that we need to look into what that bit more looks like. And then the last is that if we are to incorporate the two, restoration and Kaitiakitanga, that it has to actually be a multi-discipline approach. So rather than focusing on someone who's gone through and looked at ecology from a Māori perspective, we actually need practitioners. So we need practitioners of weaving, of carving, of language revitalisation, all those areas to ensure that we have restoration projects that are relevant for our Māori communities. And I've gone through this and I'm running out of time, but this is where I'm off to next, to run the focus groups and the interviews, to get really into more detail about the data that we've found through the surveys. Yep, and that's me. You got a question on the back?
How did you choose your survey participants?
So it was actually quite difficult. We sent the surveys out through our networks on email. But for me, that wasn't for me personally. That was not going to acquire different responses. We were always going to get an academic response, and that's not what we wanted. So we sent it out through social media, through whānau, we forwarded it on to whānau, and then continued like that. The next part of that, I think we wanted to also get paper-based out to some of the whānau who might have missed out. But the main focus was to get a general idea of what people are thinking, and then move into the focus groups to get into some of that detail.